Fun fact, each of the top 5 third basemen in ADP entering the season finished top 6 at the position, and each of them finished top 40 overall in Roto. Not too shabby. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, November 15th. I am Frank Stampfl, and he is back. Scott White is back. The crowd goes wild. Hello there, Frank. Scott. How was your time off? How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. My time off was good, relaxing,
Nice.
and much needed after the long season that was. I kept working straight through October. I mean, you're always kind of anxious. The end of September, it feels like a finish line. But I delayed it a bit, delayed gratification, and it was nice. And I'm back to talk more baseball as the hot stove begins to heat up. And we're about to talk about what may be the most interesting position of all heading into 2023.
Yes, indeed. Today on the show, we will do a third base recap, year in review, look at the top 10 at the position, and then we will take an early look at Scott's top 20 at third base heading into 2023. You mentioned, Scott, obviously you took some time off. I had some time off as well. I went out to the Arizona Fall League, some first pitch Arizona. A lot of fun. Got to see Matt Mervis in person. He was everything you could have hoped for and then some. But we'll have all off season.
I think you're now the what is it? It's not the captain of the hype train, right?
I guess
you're driving this train, Frank, for Matt Mervis. I think I have to transfer my engineer hat to you and let you take the wheel or whatever you drive a train with. Because we did our first mock for CBS 12-team Roto League. There've been some mocks out there in the industry, most of them 15-team Rotos. Nobody really plays in those kinds of leagues except industry people. So we did a 12-teamer, but Frank, you took Matt Mervis so early.
Did I? How early did I take him?
It was like round 17 or something in a 12-teamer.
That sounds like a great time to take Matt Mervis. What are you talking about?
That's what I mean. You're driving the train.
I am the conductor. I am the captain now of the Matt Mervis train. But yes, I'm sure we'll talk about him all off season. We'll see what the Cubs do at first base if they bring someone in. There's been some rumors about that. Scott, I had this idea that once free agency opened, we would get all this player movement because of last year. Remember when it reopened after the lockout and there was just so much going on? I think because that's what happened most recently in the most recent off season, that I just had this idea in my head that it was going to happen again. And now I'm being reminded that most off seasons are usually really, really slow. So I don't know when things are going to pick up, but obviously we've got winter meetings coming up in December, so on and so forth. Any breaking news that happens, we will likely have an emergency podcast in your feed. But let's jump into the position, Scotty. You mentioned this could be the most interesting position, third base. Very top heavy. I think there's a very clear top 5, potentially top 6 at the position. Really, if you look at the top 8 that rounds out with like Bregman and Gunnar Henderson, I really want one of those guys heading into next season to be my starter, because then you get into Matt Chapman and Eugenio Suarez, and those guys are okay, but I don't really want them to be my starter at third base. So there's elite talent up top, but it falls off a cliff quite quickly.
Yeah, I would say 6 really, really good options that are going to be drafted. I think within the first 3 rounds, though one of them, based on very early ADP data, it's possible he slips to round 4, even 5. But then after that 6, you mentioned Alex Bregman, Gunnar Henderson, and I would also put Max Muncy in there as 3 kind of fallback options if you miss out on that elite group of 6. And then after that, it's dreadful. It's dreadful. And obviously we're stretching it a bit with Muncy because he was basically dreadful for the 2022 season, got things back on track the final 2 months. But, obviously the overall number's not where you want to see them from Muncy. And he's also eligible at second base. So it's very likely somebody drafts him there before you get a chance to take him at third base.
All right, well, let's jump in and we will recap the position. The number 1 third baseman this past season, no surprise, it was Jose Ramirez, who finished 5th overall in Roto. He averaged 3.8 fantasy points per game. That was first at the position in points leagues. And ADP before the season, Jose Ramirez was being drafted as the 4th overall player. And he's been incredibly consistent each of the past 3 seasons. He hasn't finished lower than 6th overall in any of those seasons. He hit 280, 29 homers, 126 RBI, 20 steals as well. I think we're well past that blip that we saw, Scott, in 2018 and 2019. Again, just so consistent, high floor, relatively high ceiling for Jose Ramirez as well. The only knock on him is that over the final 3 months of the season, he did falter. Basically, the second half, he hit 266 with a 780 OPS from July 1st on. And it turns out that he was playing with a torn ligament in his thumb. He did have surgery on that last week, expected to be ready for spring training. Everything's good there. I have no concerns here, Scott. To me, he's penciled in as a top 3 pick in fantasy.
Yeah, I didn't have any concerns. And then that news came out about his thumb and how he was playing through that injury for much of the year. And it kind of explains the second half struggles, doesn't it? It's funny a lot of times how after the fact we find out that there was this major variable impacting a player's production. The same thing was true of Jesse Winker, and I think one other Lourdes Gurriel. Jesse Winker and Lourdes Gurriel had similar injuries situations where they were playing through it for much of the year, and probably explains why their production was down so much. Having said that, Jose Ramirez still ended up 29 homers, 20 steals, 280 batting average. Not only is he slam dunk the #1 third baseman in fantasy, but I think he's very much in the running to go #1 overall. I do have Aaron Judge ahead of him, but that's it. I have Ramirez 2nd overall in my own personal rankings. And, part of it is because of that scarcity at third base. Yes, there are 6 really high-end players there, but there's a good chance, if you are picking 1 or 2, you don't take Ramirez, there's a good chance the top 5 are gone before it gets back to you.
Yeah.
And so you're then having to try and thread the needle at that position. Not many alternatives if you want standout production there. So I other than Judge, and he's just such an outlier in terms of power, I think for the position scarcity, Ramirez is who I would go with at the start of the draft.
I said this last week on a podcast with the Welsh, where in a head-to-head points league, I think Aaron Judge is easily the #1 player. In a roto or categories league, I've taken a little bit of a step back since the season ended. I think there's an argument for any of Jose Ramirez, Trey Turner, or Aaron Judge to be the top 3 picks in any order, whatever order you want that to be. Of course, we got to see where Trey Turner winds up in free agency. But anyway, yes. The point is Jose Ramirez is locked in inside that top 3. Manny Machado was the 2nd best third baseman this past season. He finished 8th overall in Roto. He averaged 3.5 fantasy points per game. That was 2nd best among third basemen. His ADP coming into the season was 21.8. He was the 3rd third baseman off the board, so he did give you a little bit of profit there inside the first 2 rounds. He hit 298, 32 homers, 100 runs, 102 RBI, 9 steals, contributed all 5 categories. Obviously, not many steals, but this is typically what Manny Machado does provide. Last year, Scott, in the offseason, we were talking about how Machado underperformed his expected numbers and why we were buying back in. And, we were happy to take him as a 2nd-round pick. I think most people are still happy to take him in that range. But now things have kind of reversed with the expected numbers where he overperformed quite a bit this year. Strikeout rate jumped a little bit. He's not old by any means, but he's starting to get up there just a tad bit. Do any of those things worry you when it comes to Machado?
No.
Okay.
No, not really. And because we've seen his steals kind of fluctuate over the years, he's not a particularly fast runner, but we have seen him make a noteworthy contribution in steals off and on. 20 in 2015, 14 in 2018, 12 in 2021, and even in the short 60-game season 2020, he had 6 in 60 games. So there are times when he has been somebody who matters in that category. And so I think that makes him a prime candidate to take advantage of the new steal-friendly environment that we expect to see next year with the limited number of pickoff throws, the increased base sizes, the way stolen bases skyrocketed in the minors with those same rules. I think that makes Machado. I'm not going to put a number on exactly how many steals he's going to contribute, but I think I think you can more safely say that he will matter as opposed to being just a maybe.
The way he collected his steals this past season, Scott, was so weird too. 7 steals in the first 39 games for Machado. He had just 2 steals from May 21st on 111 games. I don't know what the reasoning was for that, if there was any rhyme or reason for that collection of steals, how he gathered them. But ultimately, I think you're right. I mean, I'd probably project him for 10 to 15, and he gives you anything more than that. Obviously, you'd be happy with it. The number 3 third baseman this past season, and someone I was dead wrong about coming into the year, Austin Riley finished 27th overall in Roto, 3.2 fantasy points per game. That was 5th best at the position in points leagues. His ADP was 41 coming into the season. So again, did give you quite a bit of profit there, finishing as a top 30 player. 273 batting average, 38 homers, 90 runs, 93 RBI. Scott, personally, we were on this podcast worried about the batting average and the BABIP. We thought there was a chance that can come down for Austin Riley. It did. It dropped 53 points year over year, but he also lowered his strikeout rate a little bit, and he continues to hit a bunch of line drives. So I don't know that he's going to ever hit 300 again, frankly, but I think he's pretty consistently a 270 to 280 hitter with 35 plus homers in a great lineup in baseball.
Yeah, there are a few players that you can write in for a 300 batting average every year. And the fact that Riley's BABIP did drop by 50 points and he still hit 273, I think is a pretty good sign. I don't think there's much need. Like, I don't want to overthink this one. He's had back-to-back years of MVP caliber production, pretty close to it anyway, has Riley. So yeah, I'm ready to pencil him in for more of the same next year. And I think it's worth pointing out that I was the most optimistic of the 3 who are normally on this podcast about him coming into 2022. Homer. So, I feel better. I feel good about that. But I will point out that his production in 2022 he had a huge July. He hit 423 with 11 home runs. He didn't hit even 270 in any other month. So, he had a ridiculously hot stretch during the middle of the season after, kind of a cold start and an even colder finish. I'll also point out that his plate discipline is still pretty bad. And I think that drops him behind guys like Nolan Arenado in points leagues. Actually, let me double check that. I'm not sure I actually rank him behind Arenado. So let me double check that.
He did finish behind Arenado in points leagues this past season. So
yeah, Arenado's not a guy who strikes out much. So that would make sense. I have Arenado ahead of him in points leagues. So yeah. Those are 2 small critiques about Austin Riley. Why I'm not ready to say he's number 2, number 3 at the position. I'm not ready to elevate him past Manny Machado, for instance, when for a while, particularly during that middle stretch of the season, remember he signed that record deal with the Braves while that was going on. It looked like maybe he was ready to leapfrog some of those mainstays. I don't think he's quite there, and maybe he won't get there in the near future, but he is really good. I expect him to go in round 2, if for no other reason, because of the position scarcity concerns.
That is Austin Riley. And according to early ADP, he's going at 22.6. He is going just behind Machado and Devers. So that seems to be, the consensus as of now. We'll see as more drafts go on throughout the offseason. The number 4 third baseman was Nolan Arenado. He finished 31st overall, 3.4 fantasy points per game. That was 3rd best in head-to-head points leagues. His ADP coming into the season, 55.2. So another one, quite profitable on Nolan Arenado. Big bounce back in the batting average department where he hit 293 with 30 homers, just 73 runs scored. Kind of surprising. I know he doesn't walk all that much, but Cardinals offense is decent at least. That just kind of stood off the page for me. 103 RBI for Arenado and actually chipped in 5 steals. Not that I'm expecting that, but it was a career high. So shout out to you, Nolan Arenado. His BABIP went from 249 in 2021 to 290 this past season. I'm not sure that I buy it though, Scott. He does make a ton of contact. He does not strike out. He barely strikes out. 11.6% K rate is fantastic. He hit a few more line drives, but still a lot of fly balls, near 50%. He had a career high infield fly ball rate. Those are automatic outs. And it's not like he hit the ball that much harder either, Scott. So that huge jump in BABIP, I personally am not buying it. I think maybe he's more of like a 265, 270 hitter at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. But I'm much more optimistic about him heading into next year than I was heading into this year.
I think that's fair.
He's now proven twice over that the power translates outside of Colorado. Back-to-back 30 homer seasons, and particularly this past year, a really difficult year for anybody to hit 30-plus homers. So I think if you can get a reliable 30-homer guy to position this week, that's still really valuable, even if the batting average might be a little underwhelming. For roto leagues, yeah, he's not going to give you much of anything in stolen bases, we don't think. Even so, I would put Arenado in the elite class of third baseman, that group of 6 that I really like to get one of, even if he is clearly one of the lesser of that group. And he is the one I was referring to who might slip into round 4 or potentially even round 5. And if that's the case, like, I'm all about that. That seems like great. I don't think personally, if you're drafting with me, that's going to happen, because he'll be the last of those 6 to go off the board in all likelihood. And I'm not going to wait 2 rounds to see if I can get him and then, feel like I'm screwed at third base. Like, I'm not going to approach it that way. So I guess I'm advising nobody else to let him last that long either, but it is theoretically possible that he could.
Scott, how many drafts are you going to do next year where you take Jose Altuve in the 3rd round and Nolan Arenado in the 4th?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Probably none. Well, who should go first? That's something we did that first mock draft for CBS. It was 12-team Roto League. Like I said, I actually faced this decision early in round 3, and I took Arenado. At that point, neither Altuve or Semien had gone off the board, or Ozzy Albies for that matter. And I took Arenado early in round 3. ADP showed that it was very likely somebody like Altuve would get back to me late in round 4. Then it happened. They both ended up going before my next pick, Albies as well. And so, I was left with like Ketel Marte as my second baseman in that mock. But, like I'm saying, like, Arenado's the last one. So if I didn't take him, my options on the way back, unless he just happened to miraculously make it back to me late in round 4, my options would be nobody. There were still 3 choices at second base that I could live with. So ideally, yes, a lot of drafts I'll take Arenado in round 3, Altuve in round 4, or that's ideally what would happen. I think you said the reverse: Altuve in round 3, Arenado in round 4. I don't think that's going to happen very much, because somebody takes Arenado and you're in a desperate spot at third base, I feel like.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And you mentioned there's not many 30-plus home run hitters, especially at third base at this point, as part of your analysis for Nolan Arenado. And off the top of your head, Scott, I don't expect you to know this, but do you have a guess for how many 30-plus home run hitters there were this past season?
Did we get to 20 of them?
Yes.
So was it like 23?
It was 23. And that was part of, later on when we talk about Eugenio Suarez, just the fact that he hit 31 homers, although the rest of his production was not really impressive. That's why he ranked as highly as he did. It's just we don't have as many 30-plus home run hitters as we've had in years past. So It's something that, helps elevate someone like Nolan Arenado or even Eugenio Suarez when we talk about him a little bit later on.
And that, I think, is going to remain the case. I think that's the new... And look, it's not unprecedented. You go back to just before the juice ball era in 2016. We were trending that we had some years before then where there were fewer than 23 guys who hit 30 homers in a season. So you don't have to go back that far to find that as being the norm in baseball. And I think it's back to being the norm, which, yes, does help elevate somebody like Arenado. And in a way, I don't think a lot of people are prepared for, because they're just going to see, oh yeah, 260 hitting, 30 homer guy, but he doesn't give me any steals, whatever. That's not an early rounder. Well, no, it really should be, especially given the lack of options at third base.
All right, let's get into the fifth best third baseman. That was Bobby Witt Jr. He finished 36th overall, 2.9 fantasy points per game, was 8th at the position. He's not as good in points leagues as he is in roto or categories, because he doesn't walk very much. He strikes out a decent amount. It's not egregious or anything, but he hit 254, 20 homers, 82 runs, 89 RBI, 30 steals as a rookie in his age 22 season. Average exit velocity, not all that impressive, 65th percentile, but the max EV tells us maybe there's a little bit more power coming in the tank, 92nd percentile in max EV. And according to Sprint Speed, he is the fastest player in baseball. Maybe there's a few guys that are tied for this 100th percentile, but Bobby Witt Jr. is part of that 100th percentile in terms of sprint speed. Scott, I will paint the glass half full picture for Bobby Witt, and then I'll let you analyze him, because as you have pointed out on Twitter, it's very early in the offseason. There have been 18 NFBC drafts. Bobby Witt Jr. is 8.1.
Overall.
8.1 overall.
Not a third base, 8th. He is a first rounder according to those 18 mock drafts, yes.
He sure is. And I will admit that it is very aggressive. But again, glass half full here. Prospect pedigree, what he's already accomplished, a 20-30 season at 22 years old. We have every reason to believe that he should progress. He should get better. And hopefully the rest of the Royals lineup gets better around him, which ultimately will help with the counting stats. I don't know that the batting average ever gets that great. Maybe he's 260, 270, something like that. But I legitimately think he can hit 25 homers with 40 plus steals, Scott. And if he does that, it's probably worth being a first round pick, at least in a roto or a categories league. So that's my pitch, my glass half full for Bobby Witt.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking him to take a big step forward, because, I mean, if he just replicates his line from his rookie season, he places behind Nolan Arenado. You're reading off the order they finished in 5x5 leagues. Witt was worse than Arenado, who nobody, not even me, is considering for a first round pick. I mean, you break down that, you look at, we're talking primarily 5x5 leagues here, 5x5 scoring. And so you look at the stats that directly impact that format. He got the 30 steals. That's great. I'm going to read off the rest of the numbers, though. 254, 20 home runs, 82 runs, 89 RBI. There's nothing else there that's that impressive other than the steals. I'm not saying 20 homers are bad. 80 runs, 89 RBI. That's okay. But you want much better than that from a first round pick. And in fact, if you compare Bobby Witt's stat line here to Marcus Semion's stat line this past year, pretty close. Like, Bobby Witt performed a lot like Marcus Semien, if we're just talking the 5x5 numbers. And, second base is weaker than third base. So my initial rankings, I had Semien ahead of Witt, much less Witt going in the first round. I just think first round for Witt is crazy, any way you slice it. If he is going to go that early, okay, I'll moderate my stance a little bit. I'll put him ahead of Semien. I'll put him ahead of Arenado, even, who I originally didn't do that. Because, yeah, it should be a lot of steals. And while I do think that category will be much more plentiful in 2023 than we're used to it being, it's a lot. And you'd rather get it with an early round pick than not get it from an early round pick. So I get that. But to take Witt ahead of Machado, ahead of Austin Riley, ahead of Rafael Devers is just, like, it's crazy to me. I could almost understand if Bobby's Witt StatCast page was all lit up in red, but you pointed out middling average exit velocity. His plate discipline is really just dreadful at this stage of his career. He reached base at a 293 clip, I believe, a sub 300 clip. And we're talking about taking this guy in round one. He had like a 720 OPS. And we're talking about taking him in round one. Like, no, No, you can't do that. You can't do that. It's possible he'll live up to the first round price tag, but like, you don't shoot for the moon in round 1 when you have assured studs going in the same range. It's at his own position, assured studs that you could draft. Yeah, I don't like it at all. I don't. I could, and you know, part of it I think is the NFBC effect, where people are trying to win the overall. They're trying to beat out hundreds of teams as opposed to just 10 or 11 in their own league, you know? And so in that like, I still don't think it's the wisest thing to just like aim maximum upside for every pick, because obviously you're never going to hit on every single one of those picks and get the full extent of every player's upside. Like, that's just not going to happen. But you can kind of understand it from that context. If you're trying to beat 100 guys, just like, give me as much upside as I can. And, you know, if it doesn't work out and I finish 400th or whatever, then, you know, that's not any worse than finishing 40th. But if you're talking about just winning your own fantasy league, there's no reason to take that kind of risk at that stage of the draft. So no earlier than round 3 for me for Witt.
Taking Bobby Witt Jr. 8th overall, or really anywhere in the first round, you need him to hit his ceiling outcome. There is no margin for error. So just keep that in mind. Then we were talking beforehand, Scott. I think you laid it out well. There's always going to be players that have a disparity between the NFBC, which again, these are high stakes drafts. There's lots of money involved, and there's people chasing upside. Let's just call it for what it is. Versus people who play in home leagues. And that's not to disparage home leagues or anything, but there's just always going to be a few players that we see valued differently in those two different types of formats, two different types of leagues. So I think Bobby Witt Jr. is one of those where we will see that disparity.
But see, what I worry about, and this is NFBC's kind of when did NFBC start? It's a relatively new thing.
I think it's been around for at least a decade, but it's gotten a lot more popular over the past couple of years.
Yeah. So it has ADP data before anything else. And I worry it has this
it's almost like a waterfall effect.
It becomes self-fulfilling. Yeah. Like, in our first mock draft, which obviously isn't an overall, it's just you're competing against 12 teams. Bobby went in the first round of that as well, because, you know, the people who are really paying close attention to this stuff are used to seeing Bobby Witt go in round 1. And, you know, if that keeps happening, then more people get used to seeing Bobby Witt going in round 1. And sooner or later, eventually it just comes to be that everywhere he's going in round 1. And he will be one of my top bust picks if that does come to be.
All right. Well, you might be wondering, where is Rafael Devers? We haven't talked about him yet. He's finally here. He finished 6th overall at the position, 40th overall in Roto. He averaged 3.3 fantasy points per game. That was 4th best at the position. His ADP was 14.4, so he did let us down quite a bit this past season. He hit 295, 27 homers, 84 runs, 88 RBI, and 3 steals. Still hit the ball extremely hard. Really, if you look at the season breakdown month by month for Devers, he was just crushed by an awful August, like just really, really bad. 163 batting average, 515 OPS. He missed the end of July with a hamstring injury. So I guess it's possible when he returned, maybe he came back a little bit too soon, or he was playing through the injury, whatever it might be. But Scott, I mean, I'm frankly not worried about Rafael Devers in that really, really bad month. I still think he's going to be an awesome player, and he's worthy of a 2nd round pick.
Yeah, I'll take him in the first round. I'll take him at the end of the first round, just so I don't have to reach for somebody like Arenado. You know, if you don't get Devers and Machado at the turn there, then you're either settling for a second-rate third baseman or you're reaching for Arenado in all likelihood. So I want to make sure I get him. And yeah, Devers does have that StatCast page that's all lit up in red, like straight A's on his report card, basically. 98th percentile average exit velocity. You know, even if you're just looking at XBA X slug, 95th percentile, 94th percentile. I have no concerns here. He's an amazing hitter. Yeah, kind of a weird second half. Maybe the injury didn't help, but I mean, go back and look at what he did in 2021. hitting 38 homers with 113 RBI, 101 runs scored. Like, that's still first round production as far as I'm concerned.
Each of his past 2 full seasons before this year, Rafael Devers, he finished 6th and 12th overall, respectively, in Roto. So, yeah, Devers still has the upside to be a first round caliber player, regardless of format, if we're being honest. Before we get into 7 through 10, I want to run through those a little bit quicker. I do want to promote a few things. If you want to support your favorite fantasy baseball podcast, well, you can do just that. We have an FBT collection on the CBS Sports Store, which includes shirts, hats, sweatpants, hoodies, a laser engraved pint glass, and we also have a coffee mug. Speaking of which, shout out to Matt Logan. He tweeted at us over the weekend a picture of his grandma drinking from the FBT mug. It was awesome. So happy to see it. And everyone else can join in on the fun. Again, all you have to do, search Fantasy Baseball Today, CBS Sports Store on Google, or if you're watching us live on YouTube right now, you can pull out your phone. We have a QR code, which is, I'm pointing the wrong way, over there, top right corner. It's right above Scotty. And you just pull out your phone, you scan that. That'll take you right to the store where you can purchase any of those things. And of course, if you do that, use the promo code FANTASYBASEBALL20 for 20% off your order. And you can do that today. So help us out and let's have some fun. Let's take a break and we will hit the rest of the top 10 here on Fantasy Baseball Today. 7th at the position was Brandon Drury, who was one of the waiver wire ads of the season. He finished 60th overall, 3 fantasy points per game. That was 7th best in head-to-head points leagues. Great year. 263 batting average, 28 homers, 87 runs, 87 RBI. But he was much better with the Reds. He was much better in Great American Ballpark. Those numbers took a step back once he joined the Padres. And Brandon Drury is a free agent, so we don't really know where he's going to play. Early ADP is right around 180, which tells me, Scott, that other people really don't know what to do with Brandon Drury either. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, beyond that, it says they're not buying in, and
Right.
He's eligible at the 2 weakest positions, second and third base, and he may be eligible at first base as well. Double check that. Oh man, it's divided up by team. Well, definitely, yeah, first, second, and third base.
Yeah, I think
so. He has optimal eligibility, does Drury, and yet he's still going that late, and I think for good reason. Yeah, guy has a career season, not just a career season, but goes from being a nobody, right, to then being an all-star at age 30. So to give you that breakdown of his numbers in Cincinnati versus everywhere else. In Great American Ballpark, the most homer-friendly venue in baseball, he hit 298 with a 915 OPS. Everywhere else, Brandon Drury hit 240 with a 746 OPS. So unless he re-signs with the Reds, I'm going to bet against him being an all-star caliber player again. And probably in 12-team leagues, he will be, assuming he finds a place to play every day and is playing every day. Even in that scenario, I imagine he'll be kind of a fringy roster type.
I could be wrong, Scott, but I do not think he's going back to Cincinnati because they already have their Brandon Drury replacement. Nick Solak, baby. This year's Brandon Drury. Let's go. Mark it. Write it down. November 14th, November 15th, whenever you're listening to this, you heard it here first. Nick Solak. 8th best at the position was Alex Bregman. He finished 66th overall in Roto, 3.2 fantasy points per game. That was tied for 5th in points leagues, where Alex Bregman still does excel in that format. He was one of 6 qualified hitters with more walks than strikeouts this past season. He hit 259, 23 homers, 93 runs, 93 RBI. And Scott Bregman has kind of turned into this Nolan Arenado light. He hits a ton of fly balls to the pull side, lackluster StatCast numbers. He's got strong plate discipline, but he just doesn't really stand out anywhere. The counting stats are really good, but outside of that, not really that enticing.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a poster child for the effect that the juice ball era had. His entire career, up to the point that the juice ball era ended, it happened in the juice ball era. So we didn't know Alex Bregman outside of that. And with that juiced up baseball, the ease with which fly balls turned into home runs, he had the upside of 35 homers. And now it's more like 25 homers. He had 22 this year in 155 games. And he probably, like, for most of baseball history, that's probably the kind of guy he would have been. He's always had middling exit velocity and not the kind that you'd expect from a 35 homer guy. Hit 41 homers one year even. We're not going to see that from Alex Bregman again. But superlative plate discipline. I mean, in points leagues, you can probably add him to that group of 6 as another stud. In fact, in points leagues, I'm straight up taking Bregman over Bobby Witt. I don't care. He walks more than he strikes out, and that adds so much. In addition to steals not being as valuable in points leagues, as in 5x5, where they're at least thought to be very scarce. So, yeah, that's the story with Bregman. I think in 5x5 leagues, because there are limits on his home runs, because even though the strikeouts are low, he puts the ball in the air a lot, so the batting average, he's not really a standout for that. He had 259 this past year, could probably hit as high as 280, but I'd take the under on that. Bregman is decidedly second tier and more of a fallback option after that top 6 is gone.
And you mentioned the lack of steals and how it doesn't really matter in points leagues as much. Bregman has just 2 steals since the start of 2020. So that part of his game has just completely been abandoned. And obviously we should not expect anything like that from him. So that's why, I mean, I don't know. I guess
the whole stolen base landscape is changing. Let's take the angle of chaos here. And if we don't know what anybody's doing with regard to stolen bases anymore, maybe Bregman can become something of a contributor there. But yeah, he's not. 33rd percentile speed is what he had, and it's not the most likely outcome.
Number 9 and 10 at the position I'm going to put together here because, frankly, they are quite similar players. Eugenio Suarez bounced back in a big way. He hit 236 with 31 home runs and 87 RBI in his first season with the Mariners. Just very odd that a negative park shift from Cincinnati to Seattle resulted in the bounce back we were looking for Eugenio Suarez.
Negative park shift, negative league environment too.
Yeah, everything.
Everything working against him. But this is the year Suarez bounces back.
Yeah, he sure did. Still struck out quite a bit, 31%, but he did see that big uptick in BABIP that we've been looking for the past couple of seasons. Not sure how sustainable it is, but alas, that is Eugenio Suarez. And then Matt Chapman is the other one where he hit 229 with 27 homers, 83 runs, 76 RBI. His first season with the Toronto Blue Jays. Still hits the ball really hard. And very often he does that. 92.2 mile per hour average exit velocity, was in the 93rd percentile, Scott. And I know there was a point there where it looked like it was happening from June to July, 2-month stretch where Matt Chapman was elite. He was one of the best hitters overall in fantasy during that time. And then from August on, just completely collapsed once again. So not really sure what to make of it, but Suarez and Chapman seem like similar skill sets at this point. Lower batting average, but decent power.
Yes. And it was discouraging because not only did he not finish as strong, Chapman, I'm talking about, as we would have liked, but that was even though he did have that big bounce back in terms of exit velocity. He had always been a standout there with Oakland, had the hip surgery. Was it after the 2020 season or was it before the 2020 season? Somewhere around there, he had a torn labrum and his hip repaired, and the exit velocity in 2021 cratered. So we were hoping a bounce back season with another year of recovery with that move from Oakland to Toronto. And it did show up in the exit velocity, and it didn't to the same extent in the numbers. And one potential factor is that I think Toronto is becoming a net negative for hitters with the introduction of the humidor. It was, remember, this was pointed out to us, not so much the humidor angle, but in 2021, Vladimir Guerrero, remember Toronto had that season split between 3 venues because of COVID. And when they were back in their true home environment, we saw Vladimir Guerrero's numbers take a step back. Well, they got a full year there. And I think from a lot of their hitters, the production was pretty disappointing, Guerrero included. It used to be known as a hitter's paradise, but that was before the humidor. Well, even yeah, the reason I bring up 2021 and the close of 2021 is they were one of the few teams who had the humidor that year too. Every team got it installed in 2022, but Toronto did before then, and we saw the impact it had. So I don't know that Chapman is going to benefit from playing in Toronto. I mean, he's done it a year now, and we obviously saw it didn't have that much of an impact, but I don't think that was a fluky occurrence necessarily. So I do rank Suarez ahead of Chapman for next year as well. They are very similar in terms of projected output. I think Chapman might still have the higher ceiling. You were skeptical of how sustainable even a 236 batting average is for Suarez, and I don't think he has the upside for much more than that. So I guess I would have to agree. Like, he probably can't be much better than he was in 2022. But I don't know that Chapman's getting that much better either.
To your point, Scott, about Toronto and the Rogers Center, I'm looking at their park factors according to StatCast from this past season, and they were tied for 13th in just overall offensive park factors. They were tied with the Braves, with actually PNC Park with the Pirates, Wrigley Field with the Cubs. So those four teams, 13 through 16, they were all tied with a 100 park factor, which is league average.
Yeah, it's average. It's not bad. Maybe I shouldn't have said net negative, but it's not a hitter's paradise anymore, like it's been known as throughout its history.
I think the way to phrase it is it's a net negative compared to where it was in years past, where it was a much better hitter's environment. So that is Toronto, and something that could potentially affect Matt Chapman again this upcoming season. All right, so those were the top 10 at third base, and we'll get into the rankings in just a little bit. I do have some news and notes that I want to quickly run through here, Scott. We actually did have a signing. It doesn't really affect things all that much, outside of the fact that we know Clayton Kershaw is going to be back, at least for one more year. He agreed to a 1-year, $20 million deal with the Dodgers, and he was amazing as always. 2.28 ERA, 0.94 whip, over a strikeout per inning. He's still getting a bunch of ground balls and whiffs, and he's limiting walks. The only issue is workload. He has not exceeded 126 and a third innings since 2019. And I think that's probably something that we should just expect at this point for Kershaw.
Yeah, I would agree. He's difficult to rank because he's going to be good, but over how many innings?
Yeah. And I know you ranked your pitchers. I think you had him inside your top 30, if I'm remembering correctly. Does that sound right, Clayton Kershaw? If not top 30, then close to it.
Yeah, sorry. I should have those pulled up to make this a little easier.
I got it.
I have
28th.
Okay.
Unless you change it, Scott, you can correct me.
No, I have him 28th. That's all right. That's
cool. Speaking of the Dodgers, they declined Justin Turner's $16 million option, which could potentially mean big things for Miguel Vargas. Well, I don't know that they'll start the season with him as their starting third baseman, but for now, it seems like it could be good news for Miguel Vargas. Rafael Montero is headed back to the Astros on a 3-year, $34.5 million deal. Unfortunately, that means he will not be closing this upcoming season unless something happens to Ryan Presley, if he gets hurt or just falters for whatever reason. But that is Rafael Montero back with the Astros. Martin Perez is likely to accept the 1-year, $19.65 million qualifying offer with the Texas Rangers. Blake Trinan Go ahead, Scott.
I'm kind of surprised by that. Wonder how much faith does he have in himself if that's the case?
I mean, if you were Martin Perez, Scott, what would you do? Because
I think I imagine he thinks he's great.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently not. I mean, he's only 30. Well, he'll be 32 around the start of next year. So this may be his last chance to score a multi-year deal. And
that's true.
I don't know. I don't know what the market's going to be like. Obviously, pitching is more plentiful than it's been in recent years because of the new environment with the no longer juice ball. But, the kind of year he had would normally score a pitcher a big payday. So I'm a little surprised. I will be shocked if Jock Peterson doesn't accept his qualifying offer. That was the one that stunned me, the fact that he was offered it.
Yeah. Tyler Anderson is the other one that's kind of been rumored. He's like on the fence as one of those people who could accept it as well. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the open market thinks about Tyler Anderson or Martin Perez. If Martin Perez got a multi-year deal, Scott, what does that look like? 2 for 30, maybe. Does anyone give him a 3-year deal? I don't know. Probably not, but
yeah. Well, apparently that's what his representation decided. So
yeah.
Who am I to argue?
Blake Treinen underwent a right shoulder labrum and rotator cuff surgery. It's likely that he will miss the entire 2023 season. The Cubs have released a veteran outfielder, Jason Hayward, and this one was kind of weird. Astros GM James Click will not return for the 2023 season after winning the World Series. I don't know, Scott. Doesn't this seem weird?
Yeah. I think it's the first time it's happened since the 40s that a World Series winning GM didn't return. So surprising. And there seemed to be some disagreement with ownership there about how things were run. And, that's after obviously the previous regime. There were a lot of questions raised about how things were run. So it seems from the outside looking in, James Click brought a lot of stability, took him to the World Series 2 straight years, won it the second time. But again, what do I know?
I just realized, Scott, you haven't been on the podcast since the Astros won the World Series.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah. Good for Dusty. Good for all of them. Good job, guys. Way to go. You had a good season. You capped it off with a champ, Ian Chip.
I think we can all agree with at least the first sentiment there. Congrats to Dusty Baker. Everyone else, I'm not so sure. Rookie of the Year awards were announced. No surprise, Julio Rodriguez won it in the American League. And since he started the season on the opening day roster, the Mariners will receive draft pick compensation just after the first round in 2023. So it's really cool to see that this rule is already going into effect the first year where it was a thing. So good for you, Mariners. I'm happy you got it done. And I think other teams will be pretty aggressive with calling up prospects on opening day. Next year, we know that Corbin Carroll will be, part of that.
Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah, Gunnar Henderson will be part of it.
We need to talk about here soon.
In just a little bit, yeah. I think it's all the reason why Matt Mervis should start the season on the roster. And, any team that has a prospect that's close, why wouldn't you do it, right? Just to have that opportunity to chase that draft pick compensation. And then in the National League, Michael Harris beat out his teammate Spencer Strider. Harris actually, I thought it would have been a little bit closer than this. Harris received 22 of 30 first place votes, Scott. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, I thought it would be closer too. In fact, I saw some very smart people saying Spencer Strider instead, which was fun to see because, I think WAR is important for these kinds of discussions, but I think sometimes it becomes just a WAR leaderboard, basically, who should win these awards. And, that I don't feel great about that completely. Harris had a 5.3 WAR this year. Like, it's so rare for a rookie to have a WAR that high, and Strider did some historic things too, but his WAR wasn't close to 5.3. So I can understand why Harris won.
All right. The rumor mill is heating up just a tad bit. According to Ken Rosenthal, the Astros have identified Anthony Rizzo as their number 1 free agent target at first base, which is not great for my Yankees. Not great, Bob. And for Sean Murphy, John Morosi reports that the Rays are among several teams interested in trading for Sean Murphy, who, when we did our catcher preview, recap/preview, I mentioned I think Sean Murphy is going to be traded. I mean, they have Shea Langoliers. They have forgetting his name right now, but they have another prospect who's coming soon. And frankly, they just don't really need Sean Murphy all that much. So the Cardinals, the Guardians have also been linked to Sean Murphy. Yeah. I can see it happening.
I think Murphy's going to be traded as well. I do want to mention Julio Rodriguez had 6.2 WAR, higher than Harris's. So he had but there wasn't nearly as much doubt about who was going to win the Rookie of the Year in the AL. And Julio Rodriguez was there from the beginning while Harris got called up, a quarter of the way into the season, something like that.
Yeah. And he got called up from AA, which was obviously really, really surprising at the time. Let's jump into your early 2023 third base rankings, and we'll start up top. There's no surprises early on. Top 5 here: Jose Ramirez, Rafael Devers, Manny Machado, Austin Riley, and Nolan Arenado. I guess there's no surprises unless you play in the NFBC, of course, because then we get to Bobby Witt finally as your 6th ranked third baseman, followed by Alex Bregman, Gunnar Henderson, Max Muncy, and Anthony Rendon. So 2 names there that we have not talked about yet today. Max Muncy we spoke about on the second base preview. Gunnar Henderson, one of the top prospects in the game. He plays for the Orioles. He's 21 years old, and he did not play much, but he hit 259, 4 homers, 1 steal the final month of the season. Hit the ball really hard, Scott. He's really fast, 91st percentile in sprint speed, and he had a really impressive minor league season as well, where he was a near 2020 bat. The only thing that stands out to me, he's got to lower the ground ball rate near 60%. That is just not going to work for any type of power production, but the tools are there, and he's going to start the season on the Orioles roster. I think there's a lot to be excited about with Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah, I really don't know how it's going to play out. The first 34 games he got in the majors, I was pretty encouraged by it. The strikeout rate wasn't out of control. They weren't hesitant to play him against left-handed pitchers. He only stole 1 base in those 34 games, but as fast as he is and what he did in the minors, I expect he's going to run a lot more, especially with the new rules that are taking effect. So it's kind of a mystery box, but it's a mystery box with some encouraging first indicators. I suspect he'll be the consensus #1 overall prospect entering next year because he basically was prior to his promotion. He didn't use up his rookie eligibility yet, and there's no reason to move him down based on how he performed. So the fact you can get that at a position that's weak at third base, as weak as third base, and the fact that you can get him as late as 8th at third base, it makes him a pretty nice fallback option if you do miss out on those studs. But you don't really know what you're getting. And if he falls flat on his face, there's not much for you to fall back on at the position.
Yeah, I guess the ceiling is high, but the floor is also pretty low. We just don't know when it comes to Gunnar Henderson. There's a lot of projection, and that's fair because he was the top prospect, but frankly, we still don't know for sure.
I do want to mention real quick a couple things here. Gunnar Henderson is going to begin next year as third base only. It's a good chance he picks up shortstop at some point during the year, and maybe even second base at some point. Also, you mentioned I have Bobby Witt 6 behind Arenado. Again, based on the early enthusiasm for Witt and the fact that I'm probably not going to draft him either way. Somebody's going to get to him before I do. I went ahead and did move Witt up ahead of Arenado. So he's now 5th for me at third base, at least in 5x5 scoring. He's lower in points leagues.
All right, fair enough. I mentioned Anthony Rendon was 10th in the rankings here. He hit 229 with 5 homers in just 47 games. And that is the issue. The fact that Anthony Rendon has not played more than 58 games in a season since 2019. You know, what's actually funny is that the 58 games came in the shortened 60-game season in 2020. And that's the most that he's played over the past 3 years. So basically, since joining the Angels, he just cannot stay healthy, Scott. The plate discipline still looks really good for Anthony Rendon. I'm not sure how much power he will generate anymore in this environment. I really don't know what to expect, frankly. I don't know how much he could play, and I don't know what kind of player he is anymore. That is Anthony Rendon.
Yeah, I feel like Rendon and Bregman were in a similar spot entering 2022 with, okay, how's their power going to play in this new environment? They've had some injury issues in recent year. Bregman put together a full season, wasn't, it was a pretty productive player in fantasy still. Rendon continued to get hurt. He's older than Bregman. He's 32 now. So that may be a trend that continues. And if you just combine the numbers from the last 2 years when the juice ball started to be phased out, not as much in 2021, but it started in 2021 and then, even more so in 2022. In 105 games, Rendon has hit 235 with a 709 OPS. So a long time of not getting much production from him. Now, the stretch he was healthy in 2022 was the stretch where hitting was at its worst across the league. It was cold. Everybody was struggling for the most part. So if he had gotten a full summer, hypothetically, could Rendon have bounced back and put up numbers closer to his prime? I guess it's possible, but that's kind of reaching, to find an optimistic spin here. And I just don't think you can count on Rendon for much of anything. I'm still ranking him 10th at the position because, like, after Max Muncy at 9, there's not a lot to get excited about. And Rendon at least has that history of being a stud performer, and maybe the health issues of the past couple years were dragging down his production. I mean, he did have that amazing home run batting left-handed off a position. Remember that? That was like my favorite moment of the season.
Yeah, that was
Rendon,
awesome.
his one at bat from the left side of the plate, he decided to do that with a position player pitching and hit a home run. And then he got hurt soon after that, so it was quickly forgotten. But that was that showed some skill, I would say.
That was awesome.
And his play discipline's still amazing. So, I do see the potential for Rendon to have a bounce back season, and would willing to, if I just got left out of at third base, like, I'd rather gamble on that than settle for assured mediocrity. But it's not something you should make a heavy investment in at all.
All right, 11 through 15 in the rankings for next year: Eugenio Suarez, Matt Chapman, Brendan Drury, John Birdie, who we spoke about on the Second Base podcast, and Jose Miranda. His name is not Matt. This seems like a decent fallback option as well here, Scott, because he didn't disappoint as a rookie this past season. And in fact, I think he was solid. He hit 268, 15 home runs in 125 games. Jose Miranda does not walk very much, but he does make a lot of contact. He had a sub 20% strikeout rate. Doesn't hit the ball all that hard, but again, makes contact, likely projects to hit in the middle of the Twins lineup, which, if Buxton could ever stay healthy, maybe it could be a decent lineup. I don't know that the upside is massive, Scott, but I feel like Miranda is also a decent fallback option. What do you think?
Yeah, this looks like a player I'd like a whole lot more if it was still the juice ball era, but I just don't think the impact potential is high enough in the current offensive environment. He'll probably be okay. He does put the ball in the air a decent amount, which helps maximize, and he pulls it in the air more specifically, which helps to maximize what power potential he has. But that also works against his batting average. So, I don't really feel like there's a lot more upside to tap into just looking at the hitting profile for Jose Miranda. He seems kind of Ty France-like for me, which maybe that'll sound exciting to some people. I'm kind of bearish on Ty France at this point, but Miranda does have the superior eligibility. Third base, is obviously a lot more valuable than first base. He also does have first base for what it's worth, but France is only first base. So, between the two, I'm taking Miranda. But yeah, I think nothing more than a fallback option.
16 through 20 in the rankings. We've got Josh Young of the Rangers, Brett Beatty of the Mets, TJ LeMahieu, Justin Turner, who is now a free agent. So we'll see where he plays. If he plays, perhaps he decides to retire. And then Eduardo Escobar rounds out the top 20. It's got two names I want to highlight here. Two youngsters, Josh Young, who hit 204 with 5 home runs and 2 steals in his 26 games with the Rangers. 38% strikeout rate for Josh Young, which I don't know if he was just selling out, trying to hit for power in this small sample or whatever it was, but really did not strike out that much at any point in the minors. That is Josh Young. And then Brett Beatty is the other one, where he only played 11 games with the Mets, but he hit 184 with 2 home runs and a 19% strikeout rate. He is 23 years old, but he's only played 6 games above Double-A. Between these two, I think it's much more likely that Josh Young starts the season on the Rangers roster. I don't know that I could say that for certain with Brett Beatty.
Yeah, and because Beatty's also coming off surgery, that's what ended his time with the Mets. And so I've actually decided to drop him a couple spots behind LeMahieu and Turner, at least until we have a better idea what role he's going to fill. Eduardo Escobar bounced back so well in September for the Mets. In that month, he hit 321 with 8 home runs. and is still under contract. So I presume he'll enter next year. Escobar will is the favorite for third base, and Beatty will probably have to spend some more time in the minors. Young, I think he pretty much has the third base job locked up, but not because of performance. This is kind of the difference between how I rank Gunnar Henderson and how I rank Josh Young. I mean, we saw so little of both of them that they're both basically mystery boxes. But Gunnar Henderson looked pretty good in that little bit amount of time, and Young looked pretty terrible. So that adds up to 8 spots difference in my third base, or 9 spots difference in my third base rankings. 8. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the strikeout rate is a head scratcher because even before he developed power in the minors, he was good at putting the bat on the ball. So I did not expect to see that from Josh Young. It seems like in particular, sliders gave him trouble. I imagine that's usually the case for somebody who strikes out a lot, right? And I just wonder if it could be a situation like Jared Kelenic, where and didn't really have strikeout issues in the minors too, but then he came up and he couldn't hit a slider, and his future is very much in doubt because of it. I don't think we've seen nearly enough from Young to conclude that, but it's why I wouldn't want to be counting on him for much. As a late round pick for some upside, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not optimistic about what Young's going to give you in 2023.
I think Josh Young is in a similar conversation with guys like Tristan Casas, Spencer Torkelson, maybe even a Matt Mervis, where they're young guys. We don't know exactly what we're going to get. Maybe you draft him as a corner infielder in a deeper league, but more than likely, you probably want them as like a bench piece and then just kind of see what they do to start the season. And hopefully they can provide some upside.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I'm totally being fair to Young since it was only 26 games. Like, yeah. I'd feel better about Young if he hadn't played those 26 games, if we hadn't seen him strike 38% out, strike out 38% of the time in his first taste of the majors.
But maybe that creates a buying opportunity, Scott. Maybe we should be taking advantage. You mentioned him and Gunnar Henderson. They're both mystery boxes right now. I'm not arguing that Gunnar has more upside, but Henderson's going inside the top 100 in early ADP, and Josh Young's going at 212. So
yeah, I like
disparity.
212 is exactly the point in the draft where you should take a chance on upside, regardless of what the downside. The downside doesn't matter at that point. So I'd be happy to take Young at a spot, but like I wouldn't be happy with Young as my starting third baseman. Like if I just ignored the position all draft and then at 211 I took Young, like that doesn't seem like a winning strategy. Mm-hmm. Also, if you're talking about dynasty, and I assume we'll get into this later in the week, then yeah, I do see a buy low opportunity with Young in that format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I would not want him as my starting third baseman. I mean, again, an early breakdown of the position is try to get one of the top 8. Scott says top 9. If you want to put Max Muncy in that mix, for me, it's top 8. Frankly, I'd feel more comfortable with like Bregman or Gunnar Henderson than Max Muncy.
And really, I'd say top 6 through Witt and Arenado, and just those next 3, Bregman, Henderson, Muncy. That's more the fallback. Mm-hmm. Like beyond that, you've messed up if you don't get one of those top 9.
If I miss out on really everything, Jose Miranda, this would probably mean the rest of my team looks really, really good. I don't have much of an issue with it, especially where he's going. I'm sure it's not going to be, I don't know what the ADP is early on, but yeah, he's not even listed here. Anyway, Jose Miranda is probably the early fallback.
162.
Option. Okay. That's actually a little bit higher than I thought. Anyway, just wrap up here. A few changes in head-to-head points leagues. Bregman goes ahead of Bobby Witt. Max Muncy goes ahead of Gunnar Henderson. Yandy Diaz jumps inside of the top 20. And if you want to check out those rankings, you can find them on the site. Scott has all different articles written out for each of the early position rankings for 2023. Coming up on Wednesday night and Thursday morning, we'll have third base prospects, and we'll talk about the position from a dynasty perspective as well. So if you do have a question, you can send it in fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. But we're going to wrap there. For Scott, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again on Thursday. Bye-bye.